many ways you can customize SoundCheck displays, and you can save your preferences as defaults. Let's take a look. Here, I have a new display tab called Display 1. If I double-click on my curve in my memory list, it opens on my default XY graph. There are different ways you can open up graphs. If I right-click on the background, I can choose any graph type to add to this display. It opens up my default display, then I can drag data onto it as well. If you want to configure your own displays rather than use ours, there are a couple of places you can change the defaults so that you don't have to make edits multiple times. In Edit Preferences, we have a Display tab, and this lets us choose the default colors for our graphs. You can see this matches up with our graphs here. The background is white, the major x-axis grid is gray, and the minor grid lines are set to T for transparent. We have our cursor colors, and colors 1 through 8 are the colors of the items we add to the graph in order. So the first curve is blue, the second is orange, etc. Changing the defaults here changes the settings of every new XY or waveform graph. For example, if you like to see the minor grid lines, you can enable that here, and every new graph will inherit the setting. You can save these settings as a preset, which makes it easy to share across stations, or go back to the default if we don't like our changes. Now if I add a new XY graph, you can see that the minor grid lines are set. You can also change the appearance on a specific graph. I can edit the size of the display, I can right-click to auto scale and change the format or precision of the X and Y axes. For example, I might want more precision in my X-axis and want to switch the mapping between linear and log. There are more configuration options in the right-click Preferences menu. Here, I can switch where the legend is, change the position and color of the logo, and change the backgrounds and cursors. There are also settings for X and Y axes, grid lines, scale, range, so I can change these on each individual graph. Creating a new graph will always revert to the default. However, if you want to create a new graph based on a configuration you've just perfected, there's a duplicate option in the memory list under the Display tab. This copies all of the settings of that display to a new one. This is useful if you want to display multiple curves across similar looking displays. I can even go one step further and save an entire display layout as a template. I just right-click on the Display tab and choose Save as Display Template. Now, in my sequence editor, every time I drop in this new display template, it contains all these graphs and their configurations. Another very useful option from this display dropdown is Display Save as Default. This will overwrite your existing default settings with the configuration of the active graph. I find this really useful as it's much easier to perfect a graph once you have the real data on it, rather than through the settings options. Now, whenever I open an XY graph, for example, double-clicking here on a memory list item, all of these settings are inherited by my new graph. I can customize my configurations for each of the graph types, so I have different defaults for XY graphs, tables, waveform graphs, and polar plots. Then whenever I open a graph, it's going to use those settings and display it exactly how I want without needing to edit the displays. For more details on customizing your displays, check out the information in our user manual.